We'll take a deep dive into the book, Go Woke, Go Broke, with author Charles Gasparino on this episode of United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford. I'm your host, Gary Binford. Thanks for joining us. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. The video version you can find at YouTube, Rumble, Conservative Television of America, the God Family and Country Television Network, the Rose Unplugged Media Network, and vachristian.org. Wherever you go, please click that notification button so you'll know when the episodes drop, and subscribe, and please be sure to tell your friends about the show. You know, this is my fourth year, and this show started as audio, so there is an audio archive. If you go to radioinfluence.com, the United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford archive, you will find more than 180 high-profile guests who've been on this show, some of them many times. The list includes Ben Carson, Monica Crowley, Kira Davis, Diamond and Silk, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, Pastor Jack Hids, Tom Holman, Carrie Lake, Mike Lindell, Dick Morris, Peter Navarro, Judge Janine Pirro, Kevin Sorbo, Carol Swain, Morgan Brittany, Vince Everett Ellison, Brigitte Gabriel, and Tom Del Vaccaro. There are many, many others. And what they had to say when they came on the show a few years ago is just as valid today. So please go and check the archive out. Now, we all know Charles Gasparino is a correspondent on the Fox Business Network. But are you aware he's also a New York Times best-selling author? Since President Trump is doing all he can to rapidly unveil and remove the insidious stranglehold that DEI, wokeness, cancel culture, and the like had on our nation, I thought it was a great time to bring Charles on to talk about what woke did to the business world. And boy, I'm so glad that this is starting to be unraveled and removed, because we had gone down a rabbit hole that would have led to economic disaster. So you ready to hear? Well, let's get into it. He's been a writer for the Wall Street Journal, a senior writer at Newsweek magazine, and an on-air editor for CNBC, as well as a contributor to the Daily Beast, New York Magazine, Forbes, and other publications. The author of several best-selling financial books, he's here to unpack his latest literary work that's so timely for what's going on in our country right now. I welcome to the show the Fox Business Network veteran financial journalist and author of the book, Go Woke, Go Broke, Mr. Charles Gasparino. Charles, how are you?
Great, Gary. Thanks for having me.
I'm elated to have you, especially at this time, because what Elon Musk is doing and all the waste and fraud that we're finding, and we know it's just the tip of the iceberg. Wait till they really start to get into American companies and what's going on. So a blurb in regard to your latest book states, the book is an explosive deep dive into the progressive madness that has infected and corrupted the world's biggest corporations, threatening the stability of the global economy and life as we know it. You say it's a story wilder than you can imagine. So tell us about it.
Well, I mean, I'll give you a little background on why I wrote the book. So I was covering, I cover just regular financial news a lot. Mergers and acquisitions, banks, CEO changes, you name it. And I was covering the regional banking crisis and whether it was going to spread, and it did. It spread to, not just Silicon Valley Bank, but others. And I was focusing on Silicon Valley Bank. And as I was writing about this story, and mainly about the numbers, about how they had a mismatch on their balance sheet, their liabilities and assets, it was a wicked mismatch. The assets were actually going down in value because the Fed was raising interest rates and they had their assets in treasury bonds. And then there was a run on the bank and they couldn't essentially couldn't pay off the people because
right.
Or they owed more than they had, in reserve, so to speak. And then someone alerted me about all this like woke stuff that they were doing, like ESG sessions, DEI sessions. And it wasn't just like the HR department. It was like everybody in the company. The the local Fed out there. The San Francisco Fed was sort of celebrating Black Lives Matters during the 2020 protests. I mean, it was really like, you wonder, what these people were doing while the bank's balance sheet was imploding. Well, this is what they were doing, virtue signaling. So it became like this sort of book about how wokeness caused a bank to go under. If you know who's reading the book, that got reduced to about 3 or 4 pages, and it became a bigger book because immediately when I got the deal, Budweiser happened. You had a trans woman in a bubble bath, giggling, sipping a Bud in one commercial. You had the stuff going where the company was using shareholder money essentially to try to overturn a law that was passed by overwhelmingly majority of Republicans who, and a Republican governor who's very popular in the state that didn't want kids to be taught sex ed at a very young age. You had the situation at Target where they just didn't celebrate Pride Month. They went nuts on it, and so much so that whole half the store was sort of filled with pride displays. A lot of it aimed at kids, rainbow colored ones, books touting trans ideology that were aimed at teenagers. I mean, it was just really insane, and people complained. So you put all this stuff together, and I knew I had a bigger book, and that was the book I wrote. Again, Silicon Valley Bank is in the book, but it's literally 3 pages. The bigger story is Budweiser. It's BlackRock with ESG. I spent a lot of time with Larry Fink trying to get in his head why he went so obsessively forward with this investment style that really reduced oil production at a time we needed oil production during the Ukraine war, and it basically caused inflation. It's the inflation we still have today. And without giving away too much, I got into his head, and he's an interesting guy, Larry Fink. He's a lot less woke than you think. There was a business for doing some of this stuff, and I get into all of it. And then I would say the last quarter of the book is how woke is unwinding, and it's a continuation of the stuff you're seeing. The stuff happen right now, where even Disney recently came out and ditched its DEI policies, renamed it, calls it something else. Essentially, they're trying to conform with the law and edicts from the Trump administration. So that's the book, and it's reported out, Gary. It's not. It's not a polemic. I mean, it has a POV, no doubt. Every book does, by the way. But it is reported out. I spent time with the Budweiser people. I spent time with the Disney people. I spent time with Larry Fink. I will go down the list. I spent time with the Silicon Valley Bank people. And I tried to get their side of the story in there, try to explain it, where we're going with this. And, I wrote it and reported in a year. It's a little less than 100,000 words, so it's not unsubstantial, but it's a quick read, I think.
Well, and it's a much needed book, and I think what people would want to know. Please unpack how leftist radicals and activists were able to intimidate virtually every major American company corporation to embrace these woke politics, because this doesn't seem to make sense. We're talking about major movers and shakers here. How did they allow this to happen?
It's a great question. It's head scratching. Why is the Human Rights Campaign telling Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan what to do? Right? I mean,
you could tell them, but do they have to listen?
I know it's a leftist organization. If you go onto the Human Rights Campaign's website, it's it's basically dedicated to defeating Republicans all over the country, including President Trump in the last election. It is avowed leftists run it, and it's interesting when Bob Chapek was fighting the Florida law that bars children from being taught sex ed. He explained, listen, we're doing this, and by the way, we have a 100% rating from the Human Rights Campaign because we do stuff like this. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's what he said. Bob Chapek was the former CEO of Disney. So You got to ask yourself, how did they get cowered into it? Like some of it,
Yeah.
momentum. I mean, remember these sort of woke ideas, and I don't want to give away too much of the book, but just
Okay.
with me here. So, there was a change in leadership. The type of CEO, much more progressive CEO, takes over. There's ESG, which becomes sort of a founding principle of the CEO class. That makes its way from the UN to Davos, where all these CEOs go and get re-educated. It's kind of like a re-education, liberal, a progressive, a woke re-education camp for CEOs at Davos, and so it starts percolating there. Um, you do have an administration known as the Obama administration, which pushed a lot of these edicts, using the power of the administrative state to push this on companies. And so you put all that together, and you could see how these sort of like these hard driving CEOs that take no shit from anybody, how they are like cowering when the Human Rights Campaign or American Progress calls and says, "Oh no, you got to do this, this, and this." That's kind of how it happened. It wasn't one move. It wasn't one thing. It was a sort of perfect shitstorm, so to speak, of
Yeah.
woke descended upon them. And the fact is that these are folks that are much more open to it. I mean, the days of Jack Welch are gone. The legendary bottom line oriented CEO of GE, and you got like a new generation in there of the Brian Moynihan's of Bank of America, the gentleman who runs Target, Brian Cornell, Brendan Whitworth, who runs Anheuser-Busch, doesn't really run Anheuser-Busch, you should know. Uh, Anheuser-Busch is owned by InBev, AB InBev, which
Hmm.
is sort of Davos-centric company. I get into it. If you want to know how Dylan Mulvaney, got into that bubble bath, but you don't want to unsee that. It's hard to unsee that image, giggling, and she was in two commercials. She was in that one, and she was in one where she was talking about March Madness, dressed like Audrey Hepburn from Breakfast at Tiffany's, if you can
Tiffany's,
believe.
yeah.
Okay, and these were commercials, online commercials for Bud Light. But if you want to know how it came, I mean, Bud Light, I remember at the time, Anheuser-Busch was trying to blame it on like a rogue marketing executive and her boss that didn't pay attention. And I found it wasn't quite that easy. Yes, there was a marketing executive that wanted to do this, but she was under pressure, this marketing executive, to DEI the influencer base. And if you're going to go, particularly in the gender way, if you're going to go there on gender fluidity, Dylan Mulvaney would be the one person you pick, because this is a person who is, interviewed Joe Biden. She's at the forefront of the trans movement. I mean, that is a person you'd want to go to if you're going to go there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it happened. And by the way, the fact that they tried to tell me that they had no idea this was done at a low level. I'm like, Dylan Mulvaney presumably did not do this for free. She got paid, right? You should point out that I tried calling Dylan Mulvaney and her agent. They didn't get back to me. But anyway, she gets paid. Some lawyer had to approve that check. Somebody had to look at the contract. I mean, this wasn't done in a
A
dark alley
vacuum.
or in a vacuum. A much more elegant way of putting it, Gary.
All right, go do your thing.
but but you understand what I'm saying. I mean, so
Yeah.
the company do this. I mean, this is like baloney that they were like, oh, she was just some woke person and did this, and no one knew about it. But of course, people knew about it. I mean, they were under pressure. People like Alicia Heinerscheid, who's the woman's name, by the way, a brilliant marketing executive. I went back and looked at her stuff. I mean, she did this Game of Thrones commercial a couple of years ago. I don't remember that. It was a Bud Light Game of Thrones commercial for the Super Bowl, which was better than anything they put at this last crappy Super Bowl. She did the Miles Teller one. She did a bunch. Remember Miles Teller dancing with a bud with his wife and his dog at another Super Bowl? I mean, she did good stuff. I mean, stuff that people appeals to people. So you got to. So part of her going here, again, she said some unfortunate things in a podcast, which you can look up in the book. But part of it was pressure from above, and and that's where I think I tried to show is that, you know, corporate wokeness is being funneled not just from the HR departments and the DEI departments, but from the CEOs who feel sort of an obligation or a pressure to do it.
Right. Now, you're the business guy, not me. That's not my field of expertise. So you hit on the magic word. To me, it's like these DEI, they took over and weaseled their way into a lot of human resources. But my question is, how does this work? Because companies have to answer to stockholders and everything. And were the stockholders really down with this program? Like, and do you think the big problem was the human resources just kind of took over the head of the corporations? Did they try and sell them that this will work with the stockholders? Because I would have thought after Bud Light tanked that everybody would say, no, 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 I'm not going down that rabbit hole.
Well, that's kind of what happened. I mean, after Bud Light tanked, if you see, there has been a reverse of DEI and these sort of policies. I think there's a lot going on here. It's hard to blame one thing. I mean, clearly, the Supreme Court's affirmative action ruling, which outlawed affirmative action in college admissions, was based on Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which involves public accommodations. You can't discriminate against people in public accommodations. Title VII, which involves employment, is written almost the same way. So people are starting to like say, "Oh, we better get rid of our or clean up our DEI, or else we can, Supreme Court will be brought against us." There's that. There's also the fact that, and this DEI stuff and all this wokeness sows a lot of confusion and a lot of discontent among people. I mean, I know black people that are, they're super competent people. They don't need DEI. It's so stupid. They're like really smart, and they don't want to be tarnished with this shit. And these are people that are just been doing this job forever. And why have their reps wrapped up in this? If there was one thing I thought, one of the worst things Joe Biden ever did to both Kamala Harris and to Kenji Brown Jackson was get up there and say, DEI is I'm paraphrasing, but not that much. DEI is the hallmark of my administration, and it starts at the top at my vice president. I mean, he literally just downgraded her abilities and her resume by saying that, and it was stupid, and it's not right. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's part of it, and so you have that sort of element. You have the legal element. You have the element that just people hate this shit. The people we're talking about a colorblind society, and we're going there. I mean, this is the reverse of Jim Crow. I mean, think about how bad Jim Crow was. It literally kept blacks out of the workforce. It kept black people out of Major League Baseball until 19 whatever Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. I mean, think about that. How can you look at any record pre 1946 and say it's a legitimate baseball record? I don't. I mean, I look at anything after 1946. If you hit 50 home runs after 1946, you probably went up against Satchel Paige at least once. But and that's kind of like where I think we are in this society. I mean, it didn't work then. It hurt society then. It was a stain on the nation. It's bad now. Just go back to where Martin Luther King, I'm not an expert on Martin Luther King, but I've read enough to know. What could you say bad about Martin Luther King? He might have been a socialist, but he was.
That's what I say bad about Martin Luther King, because I'm not a big fan. But go ahead.
Was a colorblind socialist. And it was, I mean, if you listen to his economic theories, again, he was pretty much of a socialist, but he was colorblind.
Well, he was going into wealth. If you listen to some of his last speeches, he was calling for wealth redistribution at the time he got whacked. So just think where that would have gone if he was allowed to continue.
But he was calling for it. But remember, he wanted it on a colorblind basis. Again,
yeah, but as long as you give anything to the government, Charles, you know what's going to end up happening. It's calling for big government. You see what's happening now. We would have just gotten where we are now. We would have gotten there sooner, right?
I'm not saying I support his economic theories. I'm a libertarian conservative, so
Okay.
a socialist as you could get. But that was his core message. We've gotten beyond that so far.
Yeah.
The DEI stuff, and you have a revolt going on right now.
Hmm.
And listen, here's the thing. When you sort of correct on to one extreme, it bounces back to the other, and that's why I
Hmm.
think you have so much rebellion against Elon Musk. I mean, listen, why is American taxpayer money used to fund transgender dance festivals in Bangladesh? I mean, think about that. They're going to stop all U.S. aid. Like, some of the U.S. aid is actually pretty good, if you ask me. I think we should be helping some poor nations and, making sure they like America. But in order to correct this, you have to end it all and start from zero, because
Scratch,
they
right.
are in the extreme on the spending and the lack of accountability to the average taxpayer. And I think that's what we're seeing now, both on a corporate level and on a government level. And it's the book actually foreshadows a lot of this.
Right.
And,
Yeah. And Charles, you know the problem with trying to help these poor nations. You know that money is not going to those poor nations, just like it's not going to service this, that, and the other thing. That money is getting kicked back right back to certain people on both sides of the aisle in the United States, correct?
absolutely, I mean, how much money actually went to the Palestinians and weren't stolen by Hamas, that we the humanitarian aid? I
Right.
mean, Hamas was literally handing out the food based on who it wanted to hand it out to, and it guarantee it didn't go to women and children first. It went to its fighters or whoever. But I'm just saying that, yes, but that's what we have now. We have a great correction now on all this
Right.
wokeness, and some of it, I like most of it, I applaud. But there will be throwing out some babies with the bathwater here.
Yeah, it
Trust me.
happens. Right. It absolutely happens. You say we must immediately pry the clenched fists of radical activists off the levers of the economy. So, my question to you is, what was the end game that they were looking for by going woke business wise? What the people that wanted to go business woke, what was or is the end game they're seeking?
Well, I'm going to answer it this way. Do you remember you asked me before? Didn't they object to this, that they were degrading
Yeah.
the work that they were going? Remember, there was something known as ESG, which
Mm.
meant that the shareholders were demanding this. Increasingly, the big money managers, the BlackRocks, which control $11 trillion of assets under management, Vanguard, all these big money managers were supposed to be passive investors. They were not passive investors. They were starting to become activist investors, and they pushed their policies during proxy season, when the companies put up their proposals. And so they used their might. If you think about it, why did BlackRock go ESG? Well, there are trillions upon trillions of of assets under management held by public pension funds. And the big states control the vast majority of that. I mean, like a lot. New York State Public Pension Fund, the CalSTRS and CalPERS in California, Illinois, these are huge pension funds. So and they're run by lefties, right? People like Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris in California. In New York, you got well, it's a sole administrator, but the gentleman who runs it, is a state controller, is essentially a progressive, um,
Uh-huh.
in Illinois. So Larry Fink and BlackRock essentially wanted to manage that money. In order to manage that money, it had to tell the people that are picking the pension fund advisors, we're doing ESG and we're totally adopting it throughout our investment purposes. So then what you had was ESG applied broadly. So these big asset managers could manage the money of these lefty pension funds, which had most of the assets. Now, here's something interesting. A backlash developed on that coincided with a vast migration of people out of those states. So the pension funds started to
Right.
grow in states in 2020, 2021, after the lockdowns, right? New Yorkers moved to Florida. Californians moved to Texas. And you could just go on and on. You had a great migration of sort of middle class, mostly conservative, definitely red red voters in blue states to these red states, which made their pension funds more powerful and bigger. And
Ah.
BlackRock started losing that business, like $1 trillion in business. That's when they were forced to sort of back off of ESG. That's essentially one of the. I point that out in the book, that the growth of the red state pension fund is one of the catalysts of the end of the ESG movement and for corporate wokeness, because now no longer is BlackRock pushing ESG across all investments. If you want an ESG portfolio, it will do that for you. If you want an ESG ETF, sustainability ETF, it'll do that for you. If you're invested in a BlackRock fund that tracks, I don't know, sin stocks, it's not going to be in sin stock
Yeah.
fund. You get what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, and that's one of the reasons why ESG is unraveling. But ESG was the catalyst for forcing companies to go there, because it all of a sudden, in a perverse way, served shareholder interest to go left as a company, even if it degraded, even if you were putting trans women in beer commercials and your customers might not like it, until there was a tipping point. And the tipping point, as I pointed out in my book, was 2020, 2021, 2022, when the edifice, for many reasons, whether it's the end of the affirmative action in college admissions, whether it's just people being fed up, whether it's the wheels coming off the ESG gravy train, all happened at once. Again, a perfect storm in that case, not a shit storm, but a perfect storm.
I hear you. Charles, before I ask you to tell people why they should get your book, my final question is why did it take so long for customers to hit these companies where it hurt, which is in the bottom line? And what happened that people started to rise up to start pushing back against these unholy alliances?
Well, I think when they started really jumping the shark, I mean, people will take stuff. If I walked through a Target, I probably wouldn't care if there was a tuck-friendly bathing suit in front of me, and I wouldn't. Oh, thank God, I guess that's a good thing. But I'm going to get in trouble here. But in any event, not that there's anything wrong with that. But in any event, I think they jumped the shark. And once they jumped the shark, people started saying enough. And on top of that, Gary, again, there's never one reason why anything happens. There was a perfect storm that unraveled this, whether it's the growth of the conservative pension fund administrator who demanded it's a BlackRock, if you want to manage any pension fund in Texas, you got to back off ESG. They essentially said that this. I mean, there's lawsuits against BlackRock because if you want to, if you want to go DEI, well, remember, it's illegal according to the Supreme Court on a college basis. Well, it's probably illegal on an employment basis because of Title VI and Title VII are essentially the same, written the same way. So there's lawyers telling them that. So you had this all at once occurring in the 2020, and just the overall magnitude of wokeness following George Floyd's death was just unbelievable. And just, I mean, if I go back and why would you want to read the book? Well, if you want to know how we got here, that's why you read it. You will see CEOs virtue signaling. I quote them in their own words, and you can't believe what they're saying. It is so friggin' dumb at some point. I mean, listen, the head of Goldman Sachs came out with a statement when after George Floyd. This is a guy that was spinning records in the Hamptons. They call him his name is David Solomon. They call him DJ D Sol. He's spinning in the Hamptons, and this guy is virtue signaling about George Floyd and telling America it's systemically racist. I mean, who the hell are you? And I think that sort of that jumping in the shark, people just had enough.
I hear you. Charles, I've really enjoyed this. Please tell people how they can get your book, how they can reach you, and anything else you'd like to promote.
I'm on Twitter at C Gasparino. I'm very responsive. If you follow my Twitter page, you'll know that both positively and negatively. My book easily ordered on Amazon, and and I write for the New York Post. I appear on Fox Business and Fox News. So I try to do it all. I try to pay.
Well,
I pay that, and I've never missed a meal.
hey, well,
Never
that's good.
meal.
Hey, I thought your book, it's funny about timing because I'd wanted to get you on a year or so ago or during, and it's perfect timing now because now we're finding out about all this waste and fraud and everything that these companies have been involved in, and people are going, what? Your book foretold. So hopefully there will be, a revival that it'll keep kicking, and we'll try and get this out so people can understand. Because a lot of people can understand what's going on with what they see, but business is a world that it goes over my head. So I'm sure it goes over a lot of other people's heads. So I'm glad you unpacked all this for them.
Thank you for having me, Gary. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming on. God bless you and God bless your family, and keep on doing what you're doing.
Gary, talk to you soon.
Thank you, Charles. There you have it, Mr. Charles Gasparino. I want to thank Charles Gasparino for coming on and unpacking what has been going on in the financial world with wokeness, where wokeness infected and infested that world and was about to bring this country down. It's so important what President Trump and Elon Musk are doing because they are unraveling piece by piece, company by company, and we're going to find out there was a lot of waste and a lot of fraud and a lot of corruption going on. So this wokeness has to go. Charles' book is timely. Please check it out. And Charles, thank you for writing it and for doing what you do. Keep up the great fight. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcast. The video version you can find at YouTube, Rumble, the God Family and Country Television Network, the Rose Unplugged Media Network, Conservative Television of America, and vachristian.org. Wherever you go, click that notification button so you'll know when the podcasts air, and please subscribe. Also, leave a rating and a review. Let us know what you think about the show. So that's it for now, everyone. So until the next time, this is your host, Gary Binford, saying God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America.